All right, looks like we have a good amount right now. Well, welcome everyone. Good morning. Thank you for being with us today. We have Senator Alex Padilla here, Department of Commerce Secretary Gina Romano, CPUC President Alice Reynolds, and Golden State Connect Authority Chair and Supervisor for Calaveras County, Jack Carameli, Jr. And before we kick it off here to the Senator, just some quick housekeeping. Please use the Q&A feature if you would like to ask questions, but we do have some pre-submitted questions that we'll also try to answer throughout the event. So with that, I'll hand it off to you, Senator, to kick us off with remarks.
All right. Well, thank you, Edgar, and good afternoon, everybody. Good morning, everybody, depending on what time zone you might be in. Greetings from Washington, D.C., and another busy day at the Capitol. But I want to begin by thanking the lineup of leaders you're going to be hearing from today, beginning with Secretary Raimondo, CPUC President Alice Reynolds, and Chair of GSCA, as you heard, Supervisor Garamendi. Thank you for joining us as we both celebrate and bring about more information about the $1.8 billion coming to California for expanded broadband access. Yes, this is an investment made possible by the bipartisan infrastructure law that Congress passed 2 years ago and President Biden signed into law, along with the BLEED program, which we'll hear more about. But at the outset, given my past involvement with broadband efforts in the state of California when I was in the state legislature, despite California's leadership and state level investment in broadband, we know that unfortunately there is still a digital divide that exists in some areas of the state, whether it's underserved areas of the state or unserved areas of the state. And it's a gap that concerns us because it means for some people, depending on where you live, there are unnecessary restrictions on your economic opportunities. For young people, there may be unneeded difficulties in their educational opportunities. And so we're really talking about evening the playing field to maximize the benefits of a high-speed internet access for everybody. And it was an issue we were working hard on prior to the pandemic, but I think especially during the COVID-19 pandemic, people realized just how vital a reliable high-speed internet access really was for families, whether it was kids trying to keep up with schoolwork, whether it's how our commerce changed, or how we were able to continue to communicate with loved ones. And so, as I mentioned, with investments that have been made in the past, we've made tremendous strides in California, but there are still too many Californians that lack that accessible, affordable, reliable, high-speed internet connection. With low income and underserved communities being hit the hardest. And so that's what this $1.8 billion is going to address. We're going to be creating more opportunities for Californians and Americans across the country to not just dream bigger, but to be able to achieve more. And before I hand it over to Secretary Romano to talk a little bit more about these investments and the program, I'd like to offer just a few words in Spanish for our Spanish language outlets that are tuning in today. Hoy estamos celebrando y dando más información sobre la inversión federal de 1.8 mil millones de dólares que vienen a California para crear Internet de alta velocidad accesible y confiable para todos. La inversión histórica es gracias a la ley de infraestructura bipartidista que se aprobó hace 2 años en el Congreso y firmada por el presidente Biden. Sabemos que desde antes de la pandemia, acceso al Internet era importante para los jóvenes, por ejemplo, para tomar ventaja de oportunidades de educación. También para los adultos, tomando ventaja de mejores oportunidades de empleo. Y qué tan importante es para seguir comunicándonos con nuestras familias y nuestras amistades. Y especialmente por la experiencia que tuvimos durante la pandemia, hasta mejor entendimos qué tan importante es tener acceso a Internet de alta velocidad. En verdad es necesario mantener esa conexión humana básica. Por eso estas inversiones que van a ayudar a las familias que viven en áreas donde no hay servicio o servicio de baja calidad, mejorar ese acceso, esa conexión y sus oportunidades en su vida y sobre todo nivelar el campo para que nuestras comunidades tengan las mismas oportunidades de cualquier otras en el estado y en el país. And so with that, I guess, Edgar, back to you to introduce the secretary.
Thank you, Senator. And yeah, up next, we'll have Secretary Gina Romano give remarks. So whenever you're ready, Secretary, please go ahead.
Great. Well, good afternoon, good morning. It's wonderful to be here with everybody, but a special thank you to Senator Padilla for bringing us together and for leading on this initiative. Like many states, California has far too many people that aren't connected, and it's time to do something about that. As President Biden often says, internet access is no longer a luxury. It's a necessity. You know, as the senator was just saying, if you want to run a business, small business, go to school, see the doctor, run a family farm, you need access to the internet. And right now, there's about 8.5 million locations in America that lack access to high quality service. In California alone, more than 300,000 unserved locations. That's people, you know, friends, family, neighbors, small businesses who can't just jump online the way we all do and take for granted. And by the way, on top of that 300,000 people who have no access, there are thousands more who either have access that's too expensive to afford, and therefore they don't have it, or maybe it's low quality access. And so based on those numbers, as the senator said, California will be receiving $1.8 billion to ensure that every Californian has access to high speed, high quality, affordable internet. I would say President Biden isn't the only president to recognize the digital divide, but he's the first president to deliver on the promise of closing that divide. For a long time, we've known that a lot of Americans, particularly people of color, particularly people who live in rural areas, particularly low-income folks, have been unconnected and left behind. And other presidents have talked about it, other Congresses have talked about it. But President Biden has said that we have to do something about it. And so we passed, and Senator Padilla was right there to do it, passed the infrastructure package, which gives us the funds we need to finally connect every American and every Californian. There's been, some people say to me, because we at the Commerce Department are responsible for implementing this, Secretary, this is so hard. Isn't this going to be hard? Of course it's hard, but we're a great country and we can do hard things because every American deserves to be connected, period. And that's, I know the senator is committed to that. And I know also he's committed to making sure that the jobs that are created by this go to folks who look like America and are high paying jobs. And as many of them are union jobs as possible. So, you know, once upon a time, people in the rural South didn't have electricity, actually not that long ago. And the country said, we're going to electrify. We had the Rural Electrification Act 100 years ago, like the interstate highway system that followed it. And now everyone has electricity. 10 years from now, everyone will have the internet. We're going to close the gap and we're going to finally make it happen. We're going to make it a reality. And I'm honored to be able to do this work and to have folks like Senator Padilla to do the work with.
Great. Thank you so much, Secretary. Up next, we'll have CPUC President Alice Reynolds to give some remarks. Go ahead.
Thank you, Edgar. I'm Alice Reynolds, President of the California Public Utilities Commission, and I'm extremely honored to join the panel today with Senator Padilla, Secretary Raimundo, and Supervisor Carameli, each of whom is a true leader in the effort to bridge the digital divide. And it's really my great pleasure to join in the celebration of this important milestone for the state of California. And I'd like to start with a broad thank you to the Biden-Harris administration and Congress for this historic award, $1.8 billion from the BEAD program. California has been laser focused on its comprehensive Broadband for All initiative, and this funding will provide that critical pillar for that effort and will provide tangible benefits throughout the state, helping families who've been left behind for too long to access affordable high-speed internet. Since the onset of the pandemic, really since 2020, the state and the federal government have been working in close partnership and with increased urgency to improve broadband access for all Californians. We've taken actions to expand and accelerate these efforts and allocated unprecedented amounts of funding toward broadband infrastructure and digital equity. And in addition to the Bipartisan Infrastructure Act, Governor Newsom signed historic legislation in 2021, creating a structure to achieve broadband for all in California. And this included a last mile broadband program, as well as a statewide middle mile network and funds to assist local governments in these efforts. So really, the reason I bring this up is that California is well positioned to put this BEAD funding to extremely good use. And in particular, I want to highlight California's statewide open access middle mile network that will provide the foundation for the projects funded by BEAD in both rural and urban communities. This infrastructure will help the last mile projects pencil out where existing middle mile broadband access is too expensive and doesn't exist. And in California, we're also empowering tribes and local governments to plan, build, and finance broadband networks. The California Public Utilities Commission has approved 101 technical assistance grants in 56 of the state's 58 counties. These will fund strategic plans, network engineering, and environmental impact reports. And this program really gives local governments a jump start to be ready to participate in the BEAD program. So in sum, California is poised to foster future-proof networks that provide equitable, affordable, and reliable service to all Californians. The $1.8 billion in BEAD funding is sorely needed and will be put to good use in California. So thank you again, Senator Padilla, Secretary Raimondo, and really the entire Biden-Harris administration and Congress for these extraordinary generational investments in California. Thank you.
Thank you, President Reynolds. And then last speaker before we head into the Q&A, we have Supervisor Jack Carameli. Go ahead, Supervisor.
Thank you very much, and good afternoon. As I was stated, my name is Jack Carameli. I'm a supervisor in Calaveras County, California, and I'm chairman of the Golden State Connect Authority. I'd like to start by thanking Senator Padilla for his leadership in bringing broadband access to rural California. I also like to thank Secretary Raimondo for her tireless efforts nationally on broadband, and the CPUC President Reynolds for her leadership in making sure these funds are equitably employed to reach the broadband goals we all share for California. The need for reliable telecommunications for every resident in the state is self-evident. Among the many lessons of both wildfires and COVID, we all now know the importance of internet service to our daily lives. From education to telemedicine and banking, to be a part of our economy and future, you need to have access to broadband. That is why we as local governments are focused on initiatives on innovative ways to provide this service to all California. Golden State Connect Authority, or GSCA, is a joint powers authority comprised of 40 rural California counties with the purpose of increasing access to reliable, affordable, high-speed internet for the residents and businesses of those counties. We will build the largest open access citizen-owned network in our country. What we intend to do has been done before, as the Secretary said. In 1936, 90% of the farms in the United States lacked electricity. To raise the standard of rural living, President Roosevelt established the Rural Electrification Act, which provided low-interest loans to build lines and provide service where for-profit utilities would not. When for-profit utilities turned their noses up at this opportunity, local community cooperatives stepped up to serve their communities. Today, most rural electrical infrastructure is a product of these locally owned, not-for-profit rural electric co-ops. 85 years later, 40 California counties formed GSCA as an effort to take advantage of the unprecedented investment made by the state of California in 2021, $6 billion to finally bridge this digital divide. Based on a pioneering program in Utah called Utopia Fiber, GSCA will deploy a local government-owned open access fiber network. This means we will build fiber infrastructure and allow all internet service providers to compete to provide service to our end users. Building public infrastructure is something that local governments are good at. We know how to blend sources of funding to build roads, airports, and schools. We know permitting, and most important, we know our communities and their needs. We are well prepared for this new challenge. GSCA's finance model is based on blending state and federal dollars and our ability as a JPA to issue bonds to fund the cost of network construction. GSCA will utilize the state's newly created Loan Loss Reserve Fund to funnel the maximum amount of funding to actual broadband development and deployment. Put simply, our model will allow private capital to be leveraged with public dollars to build public broadband infrastructure. BEAD dollars are essential to our effort. BEAD will allow municipal entities like GSCA to braid state and federal funding streams to deploy projects in the most disenfranchised and hard to reach areas of our state. The places similar to rural farms in the 1930s that will never pencil out for a private ISP. We will build this service for our people, not just shareholders. Our capital can be patient, and we will not leave communities behind. The $1.8 billion in BEAD funding coming to California is needed to achieve our goal. And we appreciate Senator Padilla's leadership, which helped to provide not just this, but over many decades, helped to provide billions in support of broadband in California. I believe that broadband is an essential service like electricity. And I believe, like FDR did in 1936, that we could build something lasting and important that serves all the people we represent. This is a great program, and I want to thank the Senator and the Secretary and President Reynolds for all their leadership. Thank you.
Thank you, Supervisor. And it looks like we have time for a couple of questions. So the first one directed at the Secretary, and others, please feel free to jump in and add. But the first question is, what does this funding mean for households in California all across the state? Secretary.
Yeah, thank you. By the way, Jack, I love what you said, because it will be a lot of local co-ops that get this done in certain communities. And it's essential, in fact, so that we reach everybody. What it means is when we're done with our work, everyone will be connected. So anyone who's listening to this, who has spotty internet or internet that's, $200 a month, or, a school, or if you live, for example, in a multifamily building or an affordable housing high rise, or on a farm in Central California and you're unconnected, you will be connected when we're done with this. And I've been all over the country and spoken to people, especially small businesses, small family farms, sole proprietors, small family owned restaurants. It's incredibly hard for them to run their business without the internet, and they're being left behind. So that's the end of it. We're going to connect you, and you're going to be able to thrive.
Thank you, Secretary. Anyone else from our speakers want to chime in? If not, we can go to the second question. Great. The second, and apologies for the short turnaround, but we have just a few more minutes. But the second and last question is going to be for the Senator here, just to discuss a little bit how this funding came to pass in Congress. Senator.
Sure. And before I answer, let me just acknowledge there's a couple of questions in the Q&A that are a little bit more technical in nature about measuring speeds and that sort of thing. So we'll be able to circle back with the folks posing those questions after this session. And I do believe, Edgar, that this session will be sharing the recording with folks.
Absolutely, yeah. We are recording this, we'll be sharing it. And to the Senator's point, yes, we will be responding to those questions that came in the Q&A.
All right, and that's to your question, Edgar. How did this funding come to pass? Because it is great and it is needed, and it is historic, $1.8 billion, made possible by the bipartisan infrastructure law that was passed a couple of years ago. And just to share a super quick story, I had the opportunity to participate in one of the first meetings convened by President Biden in the beginning of the negotiations of infrastructure. Madam Secretary may recall there was initial debate as to how narrow versus how broad to define infrastructure. There were some members of Congress that wanted to stay very narrow. Infrastructure packages historically had just been roads and highways and bridges and tunnels, very much just transportation focused. There was many of us who wanted to be broader in our definition of infrastructure and maybe do more in housing or education or healthcare. And the one sort of tipping point that really did allow us to go big in what eventually became the bipartisan infrastructure law was exactly this: broadband. Because during the pandemic, people realized, as fun as it is to stream television and movies, how critical it was for a kid's education. There was that one instance of children sitting on the ground in the parking lot of a McDonald's because that was the only way they can get internet access to do their homework. That was tragic. No kid should have to, experience that. For a lot of people, it was really shopping online, ordering your groceries, ordering from a restaurant. They had to pivot to a pandemic reality. Again, people with good internet access had one experience. People who didn't had a very different experience. And so these are the kind of real world experiences that we knew we could address to do the infrastructure law on top of COVID relief packages. One other quick example that I think really turned some of my Republican colleagues around was talking about healthcare. As a father of 3 kids during the pandemic, there was more than a couple of times when somebody in the family wasn't feeling well. And when we reached out to the doctor, the first thing they would tell us was, don't come into the hospital unless it was an emergency. We'll get you a video chat with a doctor or a nurse for advice. So another example of how critical a broadband connection is in yet another important facet of our life, that of staying healthy. And so when we combined these experiences, we knew that there was a lot of good to be done. In California, some people estimate that as many as 90% of Californians have an internet connection, which is great. That means we still have more work to do. But even within that 90%, not all access, not all quality, not all reliability, and not all affordability is the same. So we have more work to do to really level the playing field for everybody. And with this truly historic investment, we're taking a huge, huge leap in that direction.
Great. Thank you, Senator. I think with that, we don't have any more time for questions, but thank you everyone for joining us and for all our panelists. Like we said at the top, we recorded this and then we'll be following up with the questions that people submitted as well. Thank you so much. Have a good one.
Thank you.